All right, so welcome. This is our I Can Help training that we are doing for Cal State East Bay Wellness Ambassadors. And just to start with introductions, my name is Shauna Olson-Hong. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and I'm the Director of Counseling Services at Cal State East Bay.
And my name is Catherine Kirkpatrick. I'm also a licensed clinical social worker and one of the counselor faculty with student health and counseling. And we're so happy to have you all here today. We also have another counselor here, Shatina Hunter. So just a shout out to Shatina. And today we have a lot of material to cover. This training can go anywhere from today, we're gonna squeeze it into an hour. It could be potentially 8 hours. So we're gonna see how quickly we can get through this, and hopefully you will come away feeling a little bit more informed and prepared for supporting our students. And we just wanted to recognize that as we are talking about suicide, this is a very sensitive topic, and it can be a bit triggering for some of us. So we want everyone to take care of yourselves. If you need to take a break, excuse yourself from the training, go outside for a couple minutes, please take care of yourself in whatever way you need. And thinking about how prevalent this issue is, we wanted to just share a couple statistics. So suicide occurs approximately every 17 minutes in the US. It is the second leading cause of death among college students. 20% of us will have a suicide death within our immediate family. 60% of us will personally know someone who has died by suicide. And these are low estimates due to underreporting and the stigma that exists with suicide. So just recognizing that all of us here in the Zoom room are likely have been impacted in some way, whether we know someone who has attempted or someone who has completed suicide. So we just want to be sensitive as we're having these discussions. And then just some agreements as we go through this presentation today. We want this to be interactive and conversational. We want to hear from you. So just please speak from your own experience. We want to listen with open minds, make sure that we're sharing the space. So stepping back if we notice we've been talking too much. And, please not repeating any stories that we hear during today's group. And then finally, and my screen's not showing me the last slide.
Stay present.
Thank you.
As much as possible, just kind of staying engaged and staying present. Yes.
Perfect. And if you all can give us a thumbs up if these agreements seem okay, or if you want to add any agreements to make this space feel more supportive, we're open to hearing from you. I see a couple thumbs up. And then we wanted to get a sense of who is in the room with us today. So we would love if you want to write in the chat or unmute yourself briefly and just share your name, your role on campus, and what are you hoping to learn from this workshop today? And if anyone wants to jump in.
And we're also particularly interested if there are hopes for the workshop, if there are things that you really hope that we will cover today, let us know and we'll do our best to prioritize that information.
And in the chat, we have Danica Leduc, Associate Dean from the College of Science, and she is interested in learning how to support students who are at risk. Thank you, Danica. And then Michelle de Coutu, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, STEM lab coordinator, working with undergrads, wants to learn how to support students. Christopher, ASI, Associate Director, learning how to support students.
All right, so we'll let folks continue to put introductions in. Go ahead, Catherine.
Ali Pelland and STEM Learning Assistant Liaison in this College of Science, supporting students and getting more knowledge.
So feel free to continue to introduce yourselves in the chat. We are going to have some time for interaction. We'll do a role play actually and go into breakout rooms toward the middle of this presentation. So you'll have some time to interact and to talk. We have so much great information that we're just going to kind of continue to move forward. But if you have a question, Catherine's monitoring the chat, and so she will read that out and we'll kind of take time to address those. All right. But I'm going to move us forward. And so the next thing we wanted to touch on are social justice considerations as we talk about the topic of suicide. So even the language that we use around suicide comes very much out of the stigma and a lot of the judgments that we can have as a culture around folks that are struggling with suicidal thoughts. So if you think about the language that we often use, we say that somebody committed suicide. But if you think about the other context that we use the word committed, it's usually committed a crime, committed something really negative. And so instead we try and be aware of what is the language that we're using around suicide. And so this is even something that our counseling center just started to do in the last couple of years, but we're really trying to change our language to things like that somebody died by suicide, that they killed themselves, or that they took their lives. So we get away from some of those negative connotations. We also want to acknowledge that sometimes people talk about a successful suicide, but we don't want to talk about suicide as being successful in any way. And so instead we use the term that somebody completed suicide. And then I'm going to just go over, so again, this workshop is called I Can Help, and it's taken from another counselor actually who works in the CSU system who put this curriculum together. And so the acronym I Can Help stands for the different tools that are taught during this workshop. So I is for inhale, C compassionately, A is for ask, and N is for now, H is for hope, E is for engaging connections, L is for lessening suffering, and P is for promoting a safer environment. And so this is what I Can Help spells out. We're going to get through most of these today. We're not going to do L and P, but I'll tell you what they are when we get there. But we're going to focus on the beginning of the skills that we are going to learn for how to find out if somebody is having thoughts about suicide, and then how to do some intervening and connecting them with resources. So Catherine already talked through some general national data, but I'm just going to show you quickly some data specific to Cal State East Bay. This is from several years ago, so I don't have updated data for us today. But basically, I want us to know who and what we're talking about when we talk about suicide at Cal State East Bay. So these numbers show us that East Bay students do admit to considering suicide. And we want to be aware that there are probably a lot more people that haven't participated in these surveys or don't feel comfortable being honest about their thoughts around suicide. And so these numbers are probably lower than they should be. So we know that stigma stops people from admitting that they're having these thoughts, from reaching out for help. And that is why it is so important that each of you are participating in this workshop today, so that you can be people that are informed about the subject, that are comfortable asking questions, and that know what resources to send folks to if they're having these kinds of thoughts. So just kind of with that context, and I know even that context can start to bring up a lot of feelings and thoughts for people, we're going to learn our first skill, which is to inhale. And so basically just knowing that this topic is hard. And so when we are even talking about it in a training, certainly if we are confronted with a student who's talking about suicide, the first thing we want to do is kind of regulate ourselves. So taking deep breaths all the way down to our belly, holding them briefly, and then breathing them all the way out. This is just a very basic way that we can start to calm our minds, calm our bodies from going into that stressed, panicked place of what am I going to do about this? Because if we are panicked, if we are getting agitated ourselves, it's much more difficult for us to help the students. And if you're interested in specific breathing techniques or things that you think might be helpful, I put into the slides, and I'll send out the slides after this workshop, a link to the self-help videos that our counselors have recorded onto our website, where you can see people lead you through deep breathing exercises or a square breath exercise if you'd like to practice that along with our counselors.
So now moving on to the C of I can help. So we have being compassionate humans, which the fact that all of you are taking this hour to be with us today and think about ways to support our students. Or I know we have a student here as well, how to support yourselves and your fellow peers and prevent suicide, shows how you've got a big part of the C, being compassionate and caring about this issue. So thinking about when we do come across a student or a peer who is in distress, expressing interest and care and showing that we are genuinely there to support them is a huge step of just creating a safe space where the student feels like they are being supported. And again, illustrating that you are listening, that you are present, letting them know that you really care about their wellness and safety. Trying for yourself, having compassion for yourself, realizing there isn't the perfect way to respond or the right or wrong way to show up for a student when you're supporting them. So trying to hold that self-compassion. And also recognizing that when a student does have thoughts of wanting to end their life, often it is a desire to be free from suffering. It may also be a desire to have meaning and purpose in life and not feeling hopeful that this is possible. And these are things that we can all resonate with in some way, even if we haven't ever felt suicidal ourselves. So just realizing, again, this person just wants to decrease their suffering. It may be that suicide seems like the only option for them. And we want to make sure we are taking all suicide talks or comments very seriously and reflecting the feelings that the person is conveying.
All right. So one thing that we want to think about there are a lot of myths and misconceptions about suicide in our culture. And so there is this myth that I think a lot of people stumble about, thinking that if I mention suicide, it's going to put the idea into the person's head, and then they're going to act where they wouldn't have otherwise, and so it will be my fault. So I just want to highlight that that is a myth. And the fact is that studies have shown that talking with somebody does not increase the risk of them taking their lives or making a suicide attempt. So if somebody is having those thoughts, and as Catherine mentioned, if they are suffering to such a degree that they're thinking maybe this is my only way out, it's not going to be a new concept that you put in their minds, right? If somebody is not having ideas about suicide, then they'll just say no, and then you can rest assured that that's not what you're talking about right now. So the experience of most people when they're having suicidal thoughts and somebody asks them directly about it is relief. Finally, there's somebody who can acknowledge this with me. Finally, there's somebody who is brave enough to talk about this and is inviting me to share my experience. And so we never want to hesitate to ask out of that worry that we're going to make it worse for them. And so the A in I can help is to ask directly. And so we want to be really clear about what we're asking about. It's not possible to prevent every suicide, but what we don't want is for you to walk away from a conversation and wonder or regret, maybe there's one more question I should have asked. Or we definitely don't want anyone to have the experience of walking away from a conversation and then hearing that something has happened to a student afterwards and feeling that regret of, why didn't they tell me? And could I have asked one more question? So asking directly is important because we need to be clear in our language to make sure that we're getting the information that we're looking for. Often people are so hesitant to talk directly about suicide that they will use euphemisms like, you're not thinking of hurting yourself, are you? And whereas that feels maybe a little more gentle than saying, are you thinking about taking your life? In the end, it doesn't actually get us an accurate answer necessarily, because we've talked to students who say, you know, I'm not thinking of hurting myself. It's not going to hurt. I'm going to take some pills and fall asleep. And so we want to be really deliberate with the language that we use to talk about, are you thinking about taking your life? Has it gotten to the point where you feel like you just want to go away and not be here anymore? We want to be clear with the questions we're asking so that we're making sure that we're getting a clear response and we know what's the conversation that we're actually having here. We also want to make sure to be genuine and purposeful. And so even if you are in the conversation feeling like, I want to know more detail, think about the reason for that. Is that more detail actually going to help you in supporting the student or connecting them with the resources that they need? If it's not purposeful, then let's not ask the questions, because once they connect with a professional, they're probably going to have to go into a lot more detail. We don't want them to have to do that over and over without a real purpose. So don't kind of just default to your own curiosity. Really think about, what is my purpose in this particular conversation? We want to be able to use direct questions in a caring and non-confrontational way. We don't want the student to feel attacked. We don't want them to feel judged. We want to do everything we can so that they can feel like they can be really open with us and honest about the reality of what they're experiencing. And then last, if you're concerned, don't leave a conversation until you've really asked the questions that you need to ask. So again, we don't want to leave any interactions without being sure that we've gotten the answers that we need. So I'm going to pause there because I know that this is a lot, and it's kind of a different perspective and different information than sometimes we get around talking about suicide. Are there any questions or things that we can clarify as you're thinking about what would it feel like to ask directly about suicide?
I'm just asking directly about suicide.
Yeah.
At what point do you get into that direct question? Are there questions you can ask leading up to that, or
Yeah.
do you just blurt out because you're thinking the student's at risk? I mean, how do you have that conversation
Yeah.
where you would ask that direct question?
That's a great question, Michelle. So what I would say is you can always put it in the context of, you know, this makes me curious, or this is a question that I'm trying to get in the habit of asking more students because I just went to this training about suicide and just realized, you know, a lot of people think about it. So I just want to ask right now, is that something that's been on your mind? And you can kind of walk up to it by saying things like, it sounds like you're having a really hard time. It makes me wonder, has it gotten to the point where you're having these kinds of thoughts? You know, so you don't have to try and link it to the conversation that you've been having, obviously, so it doesn't feel like it's coming out of nowhere. But I think erring on the side of saying it versus not saying it, or waiting for them to say, and by the way, I'm thinking of taking my life. They might not say that, you know, and so I think just opening the door to that conversation, showing that you're somebody who knows that that's possible and is willing to have that conversation, I think is really huge. So I don't know if that's helpful, Michelle, if there are other questions or scenarios even that you're thinking about, conversations you've had with students where.
Well, I just was interested because when I've had this conversation with students, it's usually because they start it or they tell me they have a plan. I've had a couple where there was a plan, they figured out they were going to do it, they shared that with me. And it was more about listening than I didn't have to ask them.
Yes,
so,
yes.
You know, I usually ask students, you know, how they're feeling, on their minds, do they want to talk about it? Never, unless the student has led me there, I've never asked them directly if you're thinking about suicide. So,
no, I think
it's a different way to
it's a great point. And I think that most of these conversations come out, like you're saying, where there is some context of the student has at least made a statement that makes you wonder. And then you say, let's back up, you know, and ask about that. When you say, I can't take that anymore, what are you really saying? You know, are you saying that I want to go away and not be here anymore? Are you saying that you're thinking of taking your life? And so I think a lot of the time what we're doing is asking directly to clarify what is the student actually telling us. If the student is very clear what they're telling us, you're right, that's a different conversation where, okay, I don't need to ask, and now I'm kind of in a supportive role and connecting them with other resources. I wouldn't say that you need now, coming out of this training, every single student that you're talking to, you're going to ask this question. But I would say have a radar up for when somebody's sharing that they're really struggling and they're really suffering. Don't be afraid to ask this question, even if it feels, not directly related to what they're saying. Put it out there, practice putting it out there, so that I think that changes our whole culture of talking about suffering, and just knowing that, this is on people's minds. Suffering is real, and this question of suicide is real as well. I don't know if others have questions about this, or Catherine, if you have anything else that you wanted to say about this.
I was thinking, similarly, if a student feels, if they're expressing, I've been really depressed, I'm just so sad, I can't get out of bed, I want to give up, kind of, I know often students might say these kind of vague statements. And so I think in that case, when I have a student in my office, and I'll say, sometimes when people are so depressed or having this intense, suffering, they do think about ending their life. And I just wanted to know, that's something that has come to mind. Has it gotten to that point? And again, like Shauna mentioned before, we are not, the myth that we are somehow putting this idea into their head is false, right? But again, I think if I ever have an inkling of doubt or question, it doesn't hurt to ask, particularly if this is a student that and you're seeing that they're at another level of suffering, right? It might just be like, I'm having a hard day and it's something minor. But I think if there's any kind of red flags going off for you all, as you're having conversations with students, and we're going to role play this, because I think it is a hard practice, and it takes repetition to get comfortable having these conversations. But our hope is, if we can try to destigmatize this and have a more open dialogue as a community about these issues, we can help kind of normalize that this is something that students go through, and that we want to talk about it, and we want to try to find a solution.
Yeah, I think that's helpful, because I guess it feels, when I'm working with a student, I always wonder, when do you cross the line of being invasive from being sympathetic and there to listen? Yes. Is it invasive to say, are you thinking about suicide? Yeah. How you get into that? So that's really helpful. Yeah. Way to frame it, think about it. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that, Michelle. And I think that sometimes we can just be transparent with, like, this is a really nosy question, like, this feels really invasive, and I don't mean to, pry or get too up into your personal business, but I just feel like I care about you, and so I need to ask, and I think sometimes putting it in that context will help students understand, okay, this is why, even though maybe this is an uncomfortable conversation. Again, I think for those who are already opening up to you and are suffering, it will be such a relief to have that broached. For other students that feel like, wow, that was really nosy, it's worth it. It's worth it. I would rather be a little nosy than miss something that's important, and miss making that connection for a student. Okay, great, thank you. Catherine, anything else that's in the chat about this ask before we move forward?
Not right now.
Okay, perfect.
So now moving on to the N of can. So the N is about now, taking advantage of the moment. If you're in a situation with a distressed student, and you are worried about their safety, we want to really act in that moment when we are having that conversation, or when that student is in our Zoom meeting or in our office. Unfortunately, we may be in a situation where we're having a conversation, we're feeling that intuition, or our doubts are starting to boil, but then we don't take advantage of asking and having that direct conversation in the moment. And unfortunately, particularly if it is, sorry about that.
No worries.
So yes, so wanting to take advantage of the present moment to really engage with these students, as Shauna was saying, ask them the direct questions. And if it is a matter of, this is an emergency, acting immediately to contact, again, if you have the student physically with you, on campus, which I know isn't happening as much these days, but calling 911 or campus PD. And if this is a situation where it's remote, asking the student what is their current location, getting that information, and then as the counseling department, that's something that we are supporting campus leaders and faculty and staff or peers, that we will then follow up with the student and can move forward with calling, whether it's local authorities, getting the appropriate people involved to assess for safety and make sure the student is okay. So yes, again, if you do have a student on campus, here's the direct number for UPD or calling 911. And then that's our contact information for student health and counseling if you have a student remote that you need us to follow up with. And we do, oh yeah, go ahead, Shauna.
I was just going to say, I just want everyone, I think everyone on this call already knows, but we are certainly working with students now remotely. And so we're doing phone calls and Zoom calls with them. And so we are available to respond if there is an immediate need that you're finding. And so please give us a call, let us know what's going on. Students can call and make a same-day crisis appointment. So those are available every day between 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And then we also have an after-hours crisis hotline that's available for students to call and get immediate support, or for staff and faculty to call to say, I have this situation with a student. And so if you were to have a conversation like this after hours, get the student's information and then call our main number, dial option 2, and let that hotline know, here's the situation, here's where the student told me they were, and they can take over from there.
So now we want to give you all an opportunity to practice some of these, particularly asking directly. And we know, again, this is a hard skill to develop and to feel comfortable having these hard conversations. So what we want to do is we're going to break you up into pairs, and one person is going to play a distressed student. And again, you'll be acting and not necessarily expressing your own thoughts and desires, but we're gonna have this. So the scenario is a student is sharing about a stressful situation. The other person will be playing either a staff or faculty member, or for any of our students on site, it could be just a peer. So the student in distress says, I just don't know if I can do this any longer. And then the support person is going to be practicing using the inhale, breathing skills, listening and responding compassionately, asking directly, and acting in the moment. So we'll give you all about 5 minutes so you can do the role play, practice kind of what that conversation would look like. And then the person playing the distressed student could give some feedback to the supporting role of just how did that feel, and one thing that they learned that they might want to do differently next time. And then we'll come back together as a group to discuss how that was for you all.
So I am putting into the chat kind of the scenario. What the student says is, I just don't know if I can do this any longer. So hopefully that feels clear. Any other questions about the role play scenario before we break into our breakout rooms? Seems clear? All right. So I'm going to put you into rooms. We'll give you about 5 minutes. There will be a little alert that says rooms will be closing in 1 minute. So you'll have that last minute to finish up your role play. Most of the rooms have just 2 people, but one I think has 3 people. And so just choose kind of your roles. One can be an observer, or you can both be, you know, like maybe the student is talking to 2 staff people together, so you can collaborate in that way. All right. So I'm going to open the rooms right now. Catherine and Shatina, you can just not choose to enter your room and stay here, and we'll see you all in a little bit. What their experience in the role plays were there things that felt easy to do? Were there things that made it challenging to ask directly? What was the experience? Anything folks want to share? Yeah, Danica.
Yeah, I just want to say Lil did a good job of being a student and not recognize, like, because I've had many students be really surprised that the counseling center is open and available to them, and I keep telling people that. So she has had that experience as well.
Yeah.
I think for me, I was stumbling on my words as a supporter, but it was easier than it's been in the past because I knew it wasn't authentic. But it was good to I think the more and more I practice, the better I'll be at it.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, I'll chime in. She
Yeah.
did a terrific job
Yay.
because I put my acting hat on and she just went right to it. And I did use a little bit of my interaction in the past that I've had with my students, and just said some of the things they say to me, and she hit it right smoothly. So you did a wonderful job, Danica. Thank you. She made me feel comfortable. I felt less stressed, from that standpoint. And she involved the health center and the counseling, letting me know that this was available. I say, really? They have that? I just go for if I get a broken nail or a cold or something, So, and typically my students will say that, oh, I only go there if I need, have the sniffers. So now it needs to be a household word and a campus-wide word, so our students will know immediately they have that assistant. And I really emphasize that to my student assistants when they're helping their peers.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And that is just a great reminder of why trainings like this are so important. We really need people around the campus to be reminding students of the resources that are available for them. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I would love to hear more experiences, but I'm just aware of time for us too. And so I would love to hear them later if anybody wants to share. But for now, we want to go ahead and keep moving forward and share about another myth that some people believe about suicide, and that is that a suicidal person is fully intent on dying. Whereas the fact is that most suicidal people are undecided. They're a little ambivalent. Part of them wants to live, and then at the same time, part of them is suffering so much that sometimes death feels like the only escape. And so this changes over time as risk factors change. So just know that as you are encountering students, as you're talking with them, they usually have not made up their minds, and they're looking for help and support, and they're looking for hope that this can get better. So risk factors fall into two key categories. One is suffering, and so psychological pain, and all that matters really in this is what the individual is experiencing, how it feels to them. So pain can be kind of mitigated by a sense of meaning, that they're learning something from this experience, or that they're using it for a purpose. But in general, when people are feeling a high level of psychological pain, that's when they're more inclined to think about suicide. And then high hopelessness, when they feel like, I don't see an end to this pain, this isn't going to get better, that's when it starts to feel like suicide feels like the only way out. And so the intersection of these two things is the danger zone, when somebody is really suffering and also feels very hopeless about their suffering ever changing or coming to an end. And so when you're sitting with a student, you can focus on these two things and just get a sense of if those are the two things that they're experiencing. If they are, that tends to be the place where people are more at risk for thinking about and acting on suicide. And then we talk about the protective factors, the things that can stop people from making a suicide attempt. And so the first thing is connectedness. Do they feel like they have a sense of community with other individuals? Are they connected to a sense of purpose and meaning in their own lives? Are they connected and part of a group or an organization, and so they feel like there's a larger identity that they're part of? Are they connected to a sense of their own future, that there is a job or something they're working toward, that they're looking forward to? Do they have a connection to a higher power, a connection to a sense of identity? Anything that's greater than themselves and greater than the suffering that they're currently feeling is really helpful. And then the last thing that is a protective factor are being connected to support resources. And so these, again, really have the power to give folks a sense that something can change, I can get support, and maybe that's going to make a difference for me. And so connecting to support resources really has the power to reduce the sense of pain, reduce the sense of hopelessness, make them feel more connected, and make them feel more capable of taking positive action and changing their situation.
So as we are thinking about, these risk factors, how can we have conversations with students and support them to increase their sense of hope? And we're not trying to deny that they have experienced real suffering, but we are trying to instill that there is a possibility of change. There can be some hope that despite all the hardship they've experienced, maybe things could get better. And the reality is, as long as the student is alive, there is still hope. So even with, students feeling like, oh, I've tried everything, nothing's worked. We want to focus on, you are here, we can work together. You have a community here to support you, and we're gonna figure out what it's gonna take to help you get through this. And thinking about, like Shauna said, connection and feeling community and feeling part of something is a big piece of hopefulness. So connecting the student to support resources, this can increase their sense of hope. So focusing on concrete steps like, hey, here is a phone number for the counseling center. Let's call together. Here is a 24-hour crisis line number. This is something that can support you day in and day out whenever you're starting to feel sad or overwhelmed. And again, we want to avoid these broad platitudes that, oh, everything's going to be fine, you'll get through this. We want to take this seriously and give them something tangible that they can hold on to. And I think sharing from your personal experience is, again, we want to be cautious how much we're disclosing to students, but even sharing, hey, I recently went to a training about how to support students who are experiencing suicidal thoughts or wanting to end their life. This is something that a lot of students go through. And I learned suicide is preventable. I know other students who've really benefited from talking to the counselors on campus, or if you, maybe for our student here with us today, if you personally have had experience, or friends who've had experience saying, I've heard it's really helped, or it's really helped me. But again, just trying to give the student that you're supporting some action steps that they can hold on to. And then for those of you, many of you have probably heard about the CARE report, but this is an opportunity if you are a student, a faculty, or a family member that's concerned about one of our students on campus. You can submit this report, which is reviewed by a team. Shauna's part of our CARE team, and there's different administrators and faculty on the team that looks at each case and says, how can we support the student going forward? Often, if it is a mental health issue, it'll come to the counseling team, and we will reach out to the student. We keep it anonymous who submits these reports, but we'll say, somebody on campus mentioned that you're going through a hard time, and we just wanted to connect, to make you aware of our services. But I think, again, if you feel like I'm holding this concern and I don't know what to do, it invites this team of people on campus who can kind of help work with you to figure out how can we best support the student and try to engage them.
All right, so now moving ahead to our E, which is engaging connections. And so again, we know that people feeling isolated and hopeless is something that really increases the sense that suicide is an option. And so we want to break that down by making people feel as connected as possible. And most people already have some existing connections in their lives. And so you can start by just asking the student, who are the people that feel supportive in your life? Who are the people you feel like you could tell about this issue and you can call on for help? So that might be family and friends, including people from their past that they might not currently be in touch with, but might still be significant people in their lives. It can also include helpers, like the counseling center. If there's other mental health organizations that they're a part of, they can think about professionals, including staff and faculty, including medical providers, RAs, peer mentors, student leaders, religious leaders, other people in their lives. And also consider making new connections. So sometimes we'll hear students say, there's nobody, and that's why I'm at this place. So first of all, using yourself and saying, I care about you. I am so grateful that you're telling me about this, and let's make sure to start to get you connected with some people, and then counseling is going to be a first step. So some people who feel like they don't have any connections already in their lives, those are the people that we want to give like a crisis hotline to say, you might not feel like you have a friend you can call. Here's a number you can always call to make sure that they know that there is somebody who's always going to be there for them. So the next letters would be the L for lessening suffering, and then the P for promoting a safer environment. We're not going to go in depth about those two letters today. For lessening suffering, we already covered a lot of those skills when we talked about compassion and how to meet a student with compassion. And then the P for promote a safer environment really thinks about how can we as a campus look out for each other? How can we destigmatize suicide so that we can have more frank and honest conversations about it, which is a very important topic that we will continue to talk about in other spaces. But for now, we want to make sure to get to, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot that this slide was here. So when I mentioned that there are crisis lines for people that don't feel connected to resources, these are a few that you can use. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is accessible to anybody, anywhere they are, and will connect them to local resources. And then again, our main phone number connects with an after-hours phone crisis service if you press option 2.
And Shauna, real quick, one question that came up in the chat from Michelle, she was asking if they can give students their own personal phone numbers and what to do if a student were to ask for that.
So that is a great question that I would say is up to you. It's something we talk about in a couple of our other workshops, including helping students in distress and then avoiding burnout and compassion fatigue. But I would say just quickly, Michelle, that kind of depends on your sense of your own boundaries and availability. If that's something that you're willing to give to a student, I'm not going to stop you from doing that. But I would encourage you to really think about what is my professional role with the student, and would starting something like that kind of cross a boundary or take me out of the professional role that I have with them? And then kind of what is my capacity, my training to be a go-to person? I would encourage you, if you do start to create that sort of personal relationship with students, that you're very clear about what are the boundaries you're setting around that. When will you be available? That you're not a crisis line, that you want to give them other resources as well, that you might keep pointing them toward other resources if it's something that you don't have the expertise to handle. So I would just want to make sure that we're never promising a student more than we can deliver. It's better to be very clear about our boundaries from the outset versus to set them up for something and then disappoint them and make them feel like you said you were going to be there for me and you weren't. So I encourage, especially staff and faculty that are not part of the counseling center, or this is not part of their regular jobs, to say, I'm here to support you as a staff person, as your faculty, but I also want to make sure that you get connected with other resources that can support you. Does that make sense, Michelle, or any questions about that? I think it's a really important question. Great.
Yeah, I think that actually leads very well into our next topic around setting limits and thinking about your own self-care as you're supporting students. So, thinking about when we get onto an airplane and there's an emergency and, the oxygen comes down and they say, okay, put the oxygen on yourself before you can support children or other people around you, right? So recognizing that we need to take care of ourselves in order to sustain ourselves and be healthy and take care of our own mental health as we are supporting our students and our other community members here at Cal State East Bay. And so recognizing, you know, just like Shauna was saying, it's okay to have boundaries, and it's okay to say, you know, a student who may feel very attached to you and have this trusting relationship may really want to speak to you, and you're the person they want to call at midnight when they're in crisis, but that might be too much. You know, understandably, it may not be appropriate, or you may feel like this is beyond my scope and my set of expertise, and I am here for you, and you know, we can definitely set up a time to speak in a couple of days from now, but I want to connect you to, you know, we have counselors on campus that are specifically trained to help students dealing with depression and suicide, suicidal thoughts, or students who might be, wanting to end their life. So I think, again, it's recognizing, okay, we can only do so much, and just sharing that responsibility with other people on campus who are also here to support our students. And yeah, again, just thinking about, you know, what can I do? There may be self-care techniques I need to be applying, you know, and so that I can be an ongoing support for as many students that are out there, because we, you know, we all can get spread so thin. But yeah, so just thinking about what are the limits that you have for yourself when you are in this supportive role.
All right, so that is most of what we wanted to present. I know we went at kind of a breakneck pace today, but I'm glad that we got through everything. And hopefully you now feel a little more prepared to support students who might come to you in distress. And also know that you're not alone. You're not the only one on our campus or at our university that is having these conversations, and we can be a community and support students together. So I'm so grateful again that everybody was able to join us today. And I'll hang out for a couple minutes if there are questions afterwards, but those were the main things that we wanted to share today. So I know we're right at the end of our time. So any last questions that folks wanted to ask to the larger group before folks start to go? All right, fantastic. All right, I'm going to stop the recording. And again, feel free to hang out for a few minutes if there are more questions that you have. And yes, Michelle, I will.